Yes, and it's the same when they inject you with various things. Not everyone comes down with the fever, but often those children will come down with asthma or intestinal problems for the rest of their life.
They admit that all Crohn's cases have the measles and other vaccine antibodies because, the autoimmune attack didn't eat your brain, it ate your guts.
That's correct, yeah. And so you often find people who have these problems are a bit brighter, they're more aware of what's going on because their brain was unaffected. Now they're going for everyone now with pharma, the calmatives as they call them, openly. And remember, after 9/11, I think it was Rumsfeld, he was on television in the U.S., it was broadcast on Canadian TV, and he was asked by a reporter, what are you going to do if another major crisis breaks out? He says, we've got contingency plans. He says, we've aerosolized Valium and Prozac. He said, we can spray over entire cities or whole areas. And I thought, well, perfect, because the Valium kicks in quick, you see, whereas the Prozac takes about a week to build up in the system and then takes over. So they've already had these things discussed and ready to go for who knows how many decades.
And now they've been spraying us, so John P. Holdren can come out and say, yes, we're spraying you.
Yeah.
He can tell the Associated Press. There can be video of it, and people just go, they're not spraying me. Well, the White House science czar just said they are. No, they're not.
Yep.
No, they're not.
In fact, there was a TV show in New York yesterday, and the NewsHour just came out and advised people who have children with asthma to move out of the east side for overnight if possible because of heavy metallic spraying. That's all they said in this little clip.
Oh.
No justification, no follow-up, no whys. That's all they said.
Well, Alan, what's wrong with having aluminum dioxide sprayed on you? I mean, they're only helping you.
That's right. And then the barium will help build up, and you'll get cancer early, so you're not a burden on the coming healthcare system.
These are really loving people. They're just so loving. Oh.
You know, you have to go into the characters behind all of this, and who is at the Copenhagen meeting, for instance. And the big eugenicists are there, the big utopians are there. Dennis Meadows is there. He was one of the big boys of the Club of Rome.
In fact, talk about that. The head of the Chinese delegation said, we own your debt. This is for those, Monday, Associated Press and others. And we want global government, one-child policies for Americans. And our government suddenly announced, we're looking at this. So, I mean, they're just out. Go ahead, Alan.
And don't forget, as they look at the panel appointed in the U.S., Congress, there's John Holdren there who wrote the book Eco-Science back in the 70s with another mainline communist, and they are communists, by the way, hardline communists. And Holdren himself said he wants compulsory sterilization of the public. He said we can't do it the same way in America as we do in India, because people in America are better educated, they might catch on, so they'll have to do it surreptitiously, covertly, and basically sterilize the people by other means. And they discussed what the ideal population should be. Now, these characters are all on board, and you have your Holdrens in every government of the Western world right now. That's not by chance. They're all on board right now, appointed. And the whole agenda is now set to roll forth at an incredible pace. Remember, too, in communism, the planks of communism was the destruction of the family unit. Families contaminate the children according to them. So did Bertrand Russell. He agreed with this by passing on outmoded family values.
Yeah, you've got to have the state purely programming, and now everywhere under the environment, police, most of the kids' curriculum is dossiers on mommy and daddy on record.
Yes, and they also said in the Communist Manifesto the family was an enemy. Because the state must be able to talk to you directly with no relative around to stand up with you.
And because we've had a couple generations raised in Europe and the U.S. and Canada on this, parents are in the news locally and going, I'm glad my child is my boss and writes reports on me.
Yeah. And that was all part of the push for single mums, by the way. That people don't realize that they don't give a darn about mothers and women's rights. They use them all for a different purpose to divide families and get them down until there's just you, the unit, like Orwell's 84, where that camera can pull you up and say, yeah, you, Smith, and there's nobody around to help you. That's what government... Nietzsche well said that. We will never win until we can talk directly to each citizen, and there's no other citizens who will stand up beside them. That's already here. But you have to understand, too, another plank of the manifesto was the distribution of wealth. And they could not bring it through under its guise because everyone knew, at least not so long ago, what communism was.
But now it's for the earth. You pay Al Gore, and the polar bears live.
Yes, they brought it back under a different guise, much more clever, and wrapped some scientific jargon and a lot of fakery over it, and a lot of hype and terror and fear if you don't comply. And they're bringing it out at the exact same
and they promise new technologies to free everyone. Well, they really set up a scientific dictatorship that doesn't allow new technologies to develop. That's actually in the treaty. Actually, the communists, that was their favorite thing 80 years ago, Alan.
Yes. And I'm going to understand it never died. It never died, as the Rees Commission showed. It was to blend with the West. By the time it would blend, the West would already be degraded culturally, and we have been degraded thanks to Hollywood and television, and again through the academia system, because Lenin said it too, we must have an international academic authority, and that was set up eventually at the United Nations.
So everything's standardized to the point where the average person tuning in who's a new listener just thinks we're gibbering and jabbering. I see people on YouTube everywhere. They watch these videos and they go, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
And it's like we're weird because we know the names of government groups. That's bad.
That's right. And they've also been trained, like Brzezinski said, that unless it's on mainstream media, that they will not believe it. By the same token, if something is on mainstream media, which is totally fictitious, they will believe it, like the fake flu pandemic. But I was contacted recently by a group under Ted Turner's group, massive network system, asking me if I come on and talk about global warming before the Copenhagen thing came up. And the two producers, a man and a woman, talked to me for quite some time. And I caught on right away that they wanted someone who didn't know their facts. They wanted someone who would just be anti-this or anti-that. And I was dishing out names, speeches, comments made by the big boys themselves on creating the fake global warming crisis, like the Club of Rome. And the two founders, I mentioned them. I mentioned their book. I said they came up with the idea and admitted it in their book. And I mentioned fact after fact after fact for an hour. And I knew by the end of the hour, these folk would not have me on because they did not want someone on who could present the facts.
They wanted somebody on to say, I like global warming, means I'll be able to surf more. You would have been on TV.
That's right. They wanted someone who would just go up there and be emotional and angry and so on, but have no facts to back anything up. That would discredit all the rest of them who had the facts but were never heard.
But the system is so discredited that even if that was the case, I mean, that's why the globalists are running out of steam. Their scientific dictatorship. Look at this. Wimberley School teaches students to be detectives. And it says they come home and investigate their parents. This is outside Austin. But this is done in Austin, too. They come home and inspect their parents and write up detectives' reports on their parents' carbon footprint. This is going on nationwide. Oh, the freedom.
Yes, and now in Britain, they're going after people who live in rural communities. Remember, Agenda 21 at the United Nations, it all ties together, where the rural folk have to be crushed into the already overcrowded cities as this generation is to die off. That's the key to it over the next 30, 40 years. And they're going after people's stoves in Britain. If you heat by a certain particular oil-type stove, it heats the house and it heats...
yeah, they're shutting off everybody's industry, and this is all in their own statements to destroy your independence. Let's talk to John in Maine, and then Andy and David in the next segment. John, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Well, hey, Alex. How you doing?
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so I've been listening to you for about 2 weeks now, and a lot of the stuff you've been saying has really been matching up with my experience after working on Wall Street for about 10 years. I worked for Deutsche Bank, private bank, and I was just involved basically in an enormous money laundering operation. It was a lot of the very same people who are calling for higher taxes have all their money in these offshore accounts with layer upon layer of legal protection so that people will never find their money.
And it's all selectively enforced. They only burn the little people who are offshore and steal their money for themselves. Yes, It's private banks, private bankers that now run the government and run the IRS. Any more comments, John?
No, well, the only other thing I wanted to say is that I was working down in the Miami office, and these banks are involved in huge drug money laundering operations as well. That's all.
You should write a report about it. But, I mean, they now admit on British television that our government grows the opium, but says, oh, it's a good thing. I mean, there really is a coming out in the open now, isn't there?
I think it was just yesterday, there's an article in a Canadian newspaper and in a U.S. newspaper which stated after a survey and investigation that the banks that were kept afloat during this supposed, and it's a planned crisis, obviously.
Yeah, the UN said drug money kept us afloat. Drug money is good. Yeah,
that's right. That came out there. Drug money did it.